Thanks for coming back, checking out another Second Chance Jeeps video here on YouTube. In this video, we're going to be installing this compressor. You may have seen if you follow me on Instagram at Second Chance Jeeps that I picked this up earlier in the week, posted a couple pictures of it, and my goal is to have it bolted down to the floor with some isolation pads and get it all wired up. It's actually all wired up, and full disclosure, this is the second time, well, probably like the third or fourth time that I'm actually trying to bolt this thing down. So I'm recording the whole thing for this video, and at the end of the video, I'm going to tell you all the things that I did wrong. So hopefully you do not do the same thing that I did, because it's been a real pain in the ass, even though it should have been a very simple project. So again, I don't want you to make the same mistakes I made. So stick around to the end of the video and you'll be able to see what I did wrong. So the compressor we're installing, it's an Ingersoll Rand. It's a 60-gallon 5-horse that I picked up from Tractor Supply. I previously had a 33-gallon Craftsman that was, I'm not even sure what the horsepower rating on it was, but it just struggled to keep up no matter what I was doing. So I finally decided to bite the bullet and pick up something a little bit bigger. And here's the spot we're going to be installing it. Same spot that my old compressor was installed in, just tucked here in the corner of my garage. You can see that there already are a couple of holes already drilled. That was attempt number one. So again, this will be attempt number 2 to get this thing bolted down. The first step was the most important, getting the compressor exactly where I wanted it. This compressor is about 300 pounds, which isn't super heavy, but it's really top heavy, which makes it awkward to move around by myself. I made sure it was clear of any obstructions, in my case the wall and the workbench, and I measured to make sure that there was enough room around the motor for airflow, and also measured to make sure that the feet were sitting square to the wall. Next, I carefully marked the location of all 3 holes with a Sharpie. Now this may sound obvious, but make sure that you put the hole directly beneath the hole in the foot, or else your bolts might be a little bit off center. Drilling the holes was up next. You need a hammer drill and a concrete drill bit for this. Like with drilling any other hole, try to drill as straight as possible. I used tape on my drill bit to mark the depth, which I determined by measuring the anchors I was putting into the concrete. Before I get too far into this, I'm just going to give you a rundown of the things that I needed to accomplish this job. You saw me drilling the holes over there into the concrete, so for that you're going to need a hammer drill. If you don't have one, maybe your buddy has one. If not, this one, it's as cheap as they come. It's from Chicago Electric, Harbor Freight brand. And I've used this for a ton of stuff over the last 5 or 6 years around the house, drilling holes in concrete. It works perfectly fine. And also has a switch on it so it can be used as a regular drill. You're going to need a concrete specific drill bit, a masonry drill bit, which you can get. I got mine at Lowe's. I think it was $8 or $9. You need to match the drill bit to the size of the anchors. Brings us on to the anchors. I used wedge anchors. Basically what you do is you drill a hole. This is a 1/2-inch wedge anchor. It specifically calls for a 1/2-inch masonry drill bit. Better idea of what this actually looks like. You can see how the bottom of it is tapered, flared out like that. So you drill a 1/2-inch hole, you hammer this down into the hole, and then you put a washer and a nut on. When you start tightening the nut, it wants to pull the bolt out, but when the bolt tries to pull out, this little sleeve here on the bottom keeps it in place, and then since it's tapered, does not let the bolt pop out. So it's a pretty cool design. These were they were less than $3 a piece. And it comes with a washer and a nut. These are the isolation pads that go under the feet of the compressor. I've read a bunch about this in the last week or so. A lot of people don't bother using them at all. A lot of people swear by them and say that it keeps the vibration down, which is good if you're on a concrete slab like I am. Hopefully you're not gonna vibrate the whole house. So these, I think 3 of them shipped to my house for $12. Again, there's going to be a link down in the description of the video so you can see exactly where I got them. They were here, they were super fast shipping, and they were here in, I think, less than 2 days. And then just some basic tools over here. You got your tape measure and Sharpie marker. You saw I use the Sharpie to mark the holes. And then just basic wrenches. I got a 3/4 and an adjustable wrench, and then just typical box cutter. Because for these, you can see that they have holes in the top. One of them actually has a slot in it. Again, that was for version 1 of this mounting, which didn't work out well, which I'm going to tell you about at the end of the video. They don't come with holes in them, but you will need holes in them, obviously, to slide them down over top of the bolts or over top of the anchors once they are embedded in the concrete. If you found this video because you're trying to do this the right way and not the wrong way like I originally did it, take this as a warning. I didn't measure anything before I went to the store to pick up all the stuff I need. So this is all the extra stuff. I didn't know if I needed 1/2 inch hardware or 3/8 hardware, so I picked up both. I didn't know if I needed a 1/2 inch drill bit or a 3/8 drill bit, so I picked up both. Washers, nuts. I wasn't sure if I was going to use these drop-in anchors as opposed to the wedge anchors, so I picked them up. I had to pick up these big-ass bolts that would have worked with the drop-in anchors. Nuts, washers, everything. Trust me, measure what you need before you go. It'll at least save you one trip. Now, if you're like me, again, everything requires at least 2 trips, but hopefully this will keep you at 2 trips instead of 3, or maybe 3 instead of 4. Just measure everything first. It's really important that the holes are cleaned out after drilling them. I used my shop vac and it cleaned them out pretty well. Using a square and a Sharpie, I found the center of these anti-vibration pads and drilled a 1/2 inch hole through the center so the wedge anchor could pass through them. Next, I tilted the compressor up and installed an anti-vibration pad under each foot, and then I pushed a wedge anchor down through each foot on the compressor, through the pad, and into the concrete. The instructions on the wedge anchor said to then hammer them in. Be sure to put a nut on the anchor before hammering them in so you don't damage the threads on the end of the bolt. Finally, I put a washer and a nut on each anchor and tightened them down. After this video was shot, I went back and put a second jam nut on each anchor to ensure that they wouldn't vibrate loose over time. And that's it. The compressor is mounted. It's mounted solid. Keen-eyed viewers may notice that that anchor there is a little bit longer than the other two. I drilled the holes the same depth. That one is just a longer anchor. I had a couple of them laying around. They were just different lengths. But yeah, it's mounted. And I mean, I know it's hard to tell in that video, but it's solid. We have a gap between the workbench, gap between the walls. You may have seen that I measured off that wall. We're about 10 or 11 inches off the wall, so it's got plenty of room to breathe, and it's mounted solid, and I couldn't be happier. So now we talk about all of the problems that I had, so hopefully you avoid the mistakes I made. First of all, I've already told you, measure things first. Measure what size bolts you need, the thickness of the bolts you need, the drill bit you need, the length of bolts you need, the length of drill bit you need. Do it all before you go to the store. The one thing that I didn't do was the feet on my compressor, you can't see them right now, but they sit up about 1.5 inches or 2 inches off of the concrete. It's like a cup shape. Measure that first. Some of them are flat and sit right along the floor, but that's going to determine what length bolt you need, or what length wedge anchor you need. Second of all, do not trust the holes on the pallet that your compressor arrives on as a template for what you're going to need on the floor. As I said earlier, my bolts came up through my pallet kind of on an angle. So when I traced those holes out onto the floor, my bolts were a little too close together, and in concrete with a steel anchor, there's no give whatsoever. Third, put your compressor in its spot, mark the holes, drill your holes, then put your bolts in. The problem I had was I drilled my holes, I put the bolts in, and then I tried to drop the compressor on top of the bolts. If you have 3 friends that are available, and if you have a ton of room around where you're going to be doing that, that might be possible to lift your compressor straight up and drop it right down on the bolts. I'm putting it in a corner with a workbench right up next to it. Even if I had 5 people, there would be no room for us to lift that compressor up and drop it straight down on the bolts. Hopefully this video makes it a little bit easier for you to mount your compressor. After all was said and done, and I made all of my mistakes and they were all out of the way, it really took less than an hour to get my compressor mounted as it is right now, with 3 holes drilled into concrete and the insulation pads underneath, the wedge anchors hammered in, tightened down. It was a really easy project. Should have been that way from the beginning if I had researched it beforehand, but hopefully now that you're watching this video, you won't make the same mistakes that I did. So I appreciate you watching the video. More Jeep stuff coming back next week on the Second Chance Jeeps YouTube channel. And if this video helped you out, do me a favor, leave a comment, like, and subscribe, because it really helps me out. So appreciate it. Talk to you next week.